All right. Say your name and who you are, where you are, all that stuff so I can copy and paste it to the beginning of the video.
Perfect. My name is Joe Mosby. I'm a senior director of engineering at Recharge, which is an e-commerce startup focused on the subscription space based in lovely Denver, Colorado.
Hi, Joe.
Hi,
How you been?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Good. Let's pretend we haven't just been talking for 10 minutes before I
Yeah,
hit
yeah, yeah.
record. It gives it a sense of like an official
You
beginning.
definitely don't have a treasure trove of bikes behind you.
That's right, exactly. And I have no idea what the things are on your desk behind you, although I have
Yeah.
Googled the teenage engineering groove box. Joe, what is some things that people are doing wrong?
Managing ambiguity and risk in engineering teams.
Oh, say more.
So, what I mean by that is that we have a lot of things that we don't know. And I see that teams managing that risk, managing the things that could potentially hurt them. There's a lot of different failure patterns that I see teams get caught up in. We have teams that basically see a thing that is scary and they will hyper index on it and are unable to let it go. And so you'll see like a unit test failure suddenly turn into 4 days work. I have seen teams that will ignore risk and basically say, "Ah, whatever, it doesn't matter." I've seen teams that live with it and know it's there, but don't really do anything with it. And this is a big problem that I see with teams is basically risk is anything that could potentially hurt you. It is something that could mean that your application crashes at a pivotal time, you cause an incident. It is the risk that your product is not going to be something your customers want. It is the risk that you're not going to be able to deliver, even if you know what they want, that you're going to be able to deliver in a timely fashion.
And
All
only
of
one
these
of those
risks,
sounds like a technical problem.
yeah, exactly. You got a ton of these. The teams have to deal with, and I think there's always the big risk of well, you could say, well, dealing with product and sales is the business's job, but if it goes poorly, you're still losing your job anyway because the company goes under.
Right.
And so these are all things that teams have to contend with, and it is something that I don't see a lot of teams handling super well, especially now that we're in a remote environment. We've been in a remote environment for a while, but managing a lot of these things and the patterns that we used to follow 5, 10 years ago, we still haven't actually cracked the code for dealing with a lot of these things now.
Oh, tell me how remote's impacting that. Why is it different?
So communication is hard and has to be really intentional when we are dealing with in a remote environment. I don't have the ability to just come and knock on your door. I can't come by your desk. Luke, if we're chatting together, like you're in Boston, if you don't want to be reached, I can't do anything about that. And so with you when you have that intentional communication that you're not prepared for, that becomes a problem. And for a lot of software engineers, myself included, you don't necessarily have a tendency to be thinking, how do I communicate well? That's not the thing that a lot of us valued first in our jobs. We started with learning the code, learning the computers, learning how to basically understand requirements, but being super intentional about our communication is not something that we prioritized. And when you have teams that are sort of angling and they haven't agreed upon what are the communication norms going to be, then you have a situation where now getting everyone on the same page with what's going to happen, that becomes much harder. And you lose a lot of the ability to just sort of, we'll figure it out as the day goes on. You've lost that because unless you're actually making plans to talk to each other, you're probably not going to. And so remote has a huge thing when one of the ways in which we have to manage our risk is we have to talk about it. We have to communicate about it. We have to get what's in all of our brains on the same page and agreed upon. But if we don't have solid communication patterns, then that is something we're going to miss.
Yeah, so as an engineer who works in a basement somewhere, perhaps with bicycles or with trees or whatever, you might
Yep.
say, I have a very good understanding of whether my code is good.
Yep.
Like it's going to work or it's not going to work. I think if I'm
Yep.
wrong, what's going to happen? How
Right.
bad is it if I'm wrong? If the thing I haven't thought of yet happens, how bad is that? And then how do I who else has perspective on that? Like, I don't have a general situational awareness of like, what could possibly go wrong? Should we just all be more anxious? Is that the
Yeah,
answer?
I think that the big piece what I've seen there's two anti patterns that I've really seen teams fall into. One is what you mentioned. I'm going to go into a hole and okay, I've got a problem. I'm going to go into a hole and I'm going to try to fix this solo. That works as well as your brain does, which for most of us, like we're super fallible. We have things that get us distracted. We have things that we're not necessarily going to catch ourselves. We also have a lot of situations that pop up because what I think my responsibility is, and what I think the boundaries around this interface that I've created, like I think my code does one thing, and it has one set of responsibilities. But has everyone around you agreed that that is the way that you deal with that?
Hmm.
And so when you have this thing of, okay, there's a problem, let me just go in a hole and I'm going to stare at it for a while and fix it myself. That's a problem because it only works as well as you have gotten aligned with everyone else on the nature of that problem. And it also relies that you are perfect and none of us are.
Hmm.
And so that's problem number one. The other anti pattern I see teams fall into is just like, well, risk is here, we're gonna have problems. We just have to like we can't fix it. You see this pop up a lot of in jokes where you'll see engineers be like, "Well, that service, it's just buggy," and they basically just put it off to the side and say like, "There's ghosts living here. We don't know what's in there. We don't want to touch
Sometimes it
it."
rains. Who could say when it's going to rain or
Exactly.
not?
Who can say this? And that's where you see problems pop up with engineering teams as well as when they recognize risk but they've also said, well, we're not actually going to make sure we are effectively protected from this risk. And that's where you start to see, well, that's just a weird service. Nobody really owns it. We don't know what it does, but if we don't touch it, it's going to be fine. And so these are things that like I see those two anti patterns pop up quite a bit. What has to happen instead is you have to have forums for teams actually saying we are going to look at this risk together. We are going to develop hypotheses about it. We're going to do this together. Mentioning the remote context, I've seen some teams that are strongly remote. They do this with extraordinarily well documented written stuff. So they're putting a lot of those pieces together. It's like we're going to write down everything that we think might happen. And when they're doing interviewing, when they're doing testing, they are looking for people who are going to communicate very well in written formats. And it becomes just a part of their culture. Not
But
every
is
organization does that. A lot of organizations, they're a little bit more ad hoc. And
right.
so when you have that ad hoc thing, you say, okay, we're going to create space now for us to get in a room, whether it be virtual or whether it be physical, and say we are going to talk about this and get a shared understanding about this. That's part one. Part two has got to be how do we turn this risk from something that is ephemeral to something that is concrete? How do
Hmm.
we get this to the point where we have it moves away from a feeling and more into a scientific experiment? If I'm scared that I'm going to have that a service might fail at an inopportune time, then I need to know what are my detection mechanisms to actually pick that out. Not just like, oh, it's going to fail and I'm going to know it when I have an incident. How am I going to put my detection mechanisms in place to actually get comfort around that? How am I going to know that I understand this particular problem in an effective way? That has to be a piece of the puzzle is you can't live with that ephemerality. You've got to make something concrete. And then once you've done that, the final piece has got to be in the event that this thing blows up, what is the downside to this, to my team, to the business? How does this rank in the priorities? If you know that, well, this application is going to crash on one out of every 1.5 million requests. Okay, fine. If the time when it's going to fail is potentially going to be, well, it might fail in a situation where we're going to miss $1 million like a bank would have, that is something that you need to have a lot more detection on. If the request that could potentially fail is going to be a $5 transaction, then the chances that you're going to need to actually put a whole lot of product engineering help behind it? Not really, because if the business lose $5 every, week or something like that, but you're going to end up spending, 5,000 in engineering resources to actually go track it down and fix it, then you don't have
Right.
something that's profitable.
Right.
And
So there's like a
so
third axis. If I usually think of risk as how likely is it to fail and how bad is if it fails. And I think of those as like two axes of risk. The third axis is like time or situation.
exactly.
Okay.
So like you see this developing in the Rice framework for product prioritization, which basically looks at 4 dimensions. What is the reach? So how widely would this thing affect things? What is the impact? How bad is it going to be if this actually pops up? What is the effort it's going to take to fix it? And then the confidence that I have that any of these factors might be variable.
Mhm.
And you look at that and you can basically say, okay, let's take all of those things, let's quantify those, and then let's stack rank them to say the highest reach, highest impact, lowest effort, those are going to rise up to the top that we want to go take care of. But the ones that are going to be, you know what, this is only affect one person, but it's going to be high effort to actually go and deal with. Those are things you sort of the bottom. A lot of teams have talked about that in the sense of product prioritization, but risk prioritization works the exact same way. You need to be able to quantify those factors. But for, like I mentioned, product prioritization is a big deal. A lot of teams are accustomed to thinking in those terms with their product manager. That's the product manager's job to sort of put those pieces together. But engineering have to do the exact same thing. They have to be thinking, how do we solve these problems together? Because it's not just this one sort of technical boundary that we operate in. We're operating in a larger business context, and we have to be able to say, we know what it's going to cost the business for us to fix this. We know what it's going to cost the business if this ends up manifesting, and we need to have awareness of those things, because that's how we're going to solve these problems together with the business, with our product teams.
Nice. So I've worked with folks who feel like the answer to risk mitigation is code coverage for your tests. It's just like get
Mm-hmm.
that test coverage number higher and higher and higher, and that in their minds moves us more and more towards less risk. Other folks would say that's a slow and onerous way to do a thing. You should be observability is actually the answer, and focus on your time to detect and time to resolve. Only prod is prod, as my observability friends would say, and you should put more attention into observability and reaction time. I suspect that you're going to say something about one of those people are 100% right and the other people are entire bozos, and you're not going to have some sort of nuanced middle ground approach.
Of course not. I think that observability is the starting point, because if you don't understand what your application is doing, then your tests don't really tell you anything. Your tests are going to tell you the things that you have declared them to, but if no one's actually trying to do those things in prod, then you can test for a lot of edge cases that actually nobody cares about. And so, for instance, if you say I really need to test to see if when we do currency conversion into Indian rupees that we are protected, but if you have no customers in India, then you don't really have a thing. So observability helps you get your bearings on what are those pieces that you actually need to be looking for. And you can then take that and say, okay, most people are going down this code path, and this is where I've seen edge cases that pop up that actually go and put and help you understand where there's going to be where the boundaries are that you need to be testing for. And then your test coverage helps you say, okay, I need to put around those places where I have my observability tells me that I've got a lot of problems. That's where I need to be focusing my test coverage.
Nice.
And so you may say that I've only got test coverage on 40% of my application. But if it's covering 95% of the inbound requests, then you're doing pretty good when you look at a cost benefit trade off. And so that's where I think the observability has to start. And then the test also, when you understand what prod is doing, then you have the ability to say, my test coverage is focused specifically on what actually happens in prod.
Mm-hmm. Nice. That's good. And it sounds like if you do all those things right and you measure it all perfectly, you never have to have human conversations about it.
I think that one of the interesting, my company is very much We are remote not because we don't want to talk to each other. We love it. We get together a lot. We're remote because we don't particularly agree with commuting.
Yeah.
Our co-founders are based in Los Angeles, and so as you can imagine, driving just sucks for them.
Mm.
And so that's a big focus for us, but we still think that talking with each other is a really, really important thing, and that's a preferred communication style for the organization. We talk a lot, and one of the ways that we get good comfort that we have shared understanding is we are both talking, and then everyone is writing down and taking notes as we go. When we do interviews, we actually go with that style of if we were having an interview right now, Luke, I would expect us to be collaborating on this problem and both of us taking notes in a shared Google Doc because we're saying, yep, we are making sure there's no misunderstanding because if we're hearing it and we're saying it and we're writing it and all of those things agree, we're probably okay. But I'm always intrigued by cultures that like GitLab, they have a very, very writing heavy culture and they focus a lot on that. Automatic, they do a lot of their interviews are totally via Slack because they're like, this is how we're gonna conduct ourselves most of the day.
Wow.
We see that you can write your stuff because that's our starting point.
Mm.
And so I think that there's multiple ways to do it, but it's got to be is everyone on the same page about how we're going to communicate? And that's got to be a very intentional thinking of most of our companies they start with co-founders. We're heavily forged by our co-founders communication styles. That's then going to influence how the early hires, like who's successful from the early hires, and then it kind of trickles down, and that's going to form the communication culture that you have. And you have to be intentional. There's no right or wrong way, but the wrong way is always if we're not agreed on what that's going to be. So if we're agreed that we're going to be a lot of Zoom, which my company is, and we say that up front and we make that very clear with a lot of our engineers and a lot of our staff that that's how we're going to deal with things, great. And if we say it's going to be writing, writing, writing all the time, that's cool too. You just got to have everybody on the same page if that's going to work.
Awesome. Thanks. Did we get it all?
I think so. I think we got it.
All right. Say your name and who you are, where you are, all that stuff so I can copy and paste it to the beginning of the video.
Perfect. My name is Joe Mosby. I'm a senior director of engineering at Recharge, which is an e-commerce startup focused on the subscription space based in lovely Denver, Colorado.